randomized policies. I don't know who it was that screamed, "What?" And it was that when I realized, oh, I mean, this is ridiculous. I have to explain what I mean by randomized, and I have to explain what I mean by a policy. There's some work there. So anyway, I'll give a brief recap and then go through this more slowly. All right. And this is what I believe FP&L will need. Okay. I mean, this is And I hope that they'll take one of our patents and use it, because actually everything I say here is based on a patent with Anna Busic. It's basically a summary. It's based on a patent, but again, I think the science is so broad that it's fine to have it in a course. So anyway, last time I talked about the work we've done on the campus, I've done that in the last lectures. And I didn't give you many details, partly because when you really get into buildings, it's hard. I mean, just, what happens when you change that thermostat, like in terms of power consumption, say? Nothing. Nothing. So basically there's a delay, and then, the decision to bring in cold air from the chiller, which is down the street, is delayed. And so that means that maybe a little less power was used by those fans bringing in cold air. And this beautifully insulated chiller won't be used as much. So it might not have to cool the water for another hour. So there's a 2-hour delay in when you change that thermostat. If you make the thermostat 1 degree hotter, you might reduce energy, but not for 2 hours from now. And then the room's hot, and you put it back down. Wham! There's a huge power surge, because suddenly there's all this air that's being brought through the cooling coils, and makes that cold water get warm. And you got to pump energy in to cool off the water. And the fans are on, the cooler's on. So that's why, if you looked at power versus time. If you turn a thermostat 1 degree warmer, you might see the power go down a bit. And then 1 degree down, and you're going to see some wham crash thing like that when you're cooling water and cranking up those fans again. Now that's a system you're not going to try to control. Well, this is say an hour. When you wanted to have it was a DR event and you want people to reduce power, you don't do it, and then you increase it later on. And so the control of a building, if you're not smart, is really hard. And if you try to do it through moving a thermostat up and down, you're completely loony. You really got to get to those loads. You've got to directly turn them on and off, and you need closed loop, design to make sure you track a regulation signal as desired. It's not trivial. Modeling a building is a nightmare, and so we just try to avoid it. So I started to talk about this work with Anna Busic but just general principles about how you would deal with an on-off device, and so I'll go and explain that a bit more. So again, I won't go through this again, but the first thing that I think a first step as a control engineer is to look at the thing you're trying to do and break it up based on the resources you have. That's the idea of this. I had this duck curve envisioned of the future of power net load in California, load minus solar generation. And if you break it up into 3 signals, the low pass, mid pass, and high pass, it doesn't seem difficult at all, as it did in the beginning. Because you can shape that slope there, you can shape the ramp so that traditional generators say whatever resources you have can follow it. And then these are zero energy signals that you can get from other resources. So this is the way a control person would think of this. I think any control person who's faced reality before, And we had a fun discussion after lecture on Tuesday. On airplanes, there are flaps and ailerons, and flaps have slower motion, we think, than ailerons. We have to look this up. So it looks like those would be flaps and those would be ailerons in an airplane. Let's look that up before, make sure we're right. So how do we get these intelligent loads? Basically, this is another example. I won't go over it again. But if you wanted to get the purple and the blue signals, how would you get them? The red is from traditional generation, most likely. I mean, what else could it be? I mean, it's energy. You need a controllable energy source somehow. I don't know what we would do if we only had thermal. Wind and solar, and no large-scale controllable resource. We'd be dead, wouldn't we? So at least the next 50 years we will have traditional generators, and they will be able to track signals like that. Okay. So, and the point here is 50% renewable integration is probably trivial. I bet we could do that in the next 5 years, based on what we know today. If we were allowed to get going. So again, the purple is low frequency pool pumps. Floater power lights on it, and our group has for a while too. Water pumping is amazing, and again, the blue fancy commercial buildings are a big load. It's really surprising. I mean, the energy consumed in these fans is like a third of the energy in a commercial building of the HVAC load. It's amazing, and they're incredibly flexible. And the people who actually installed the stuff at Pew Hall said, I'm wrong about noise pollution. There's no noise pollution. You can't hear a thing. It's hard to believe, but that's what they say. Yeah. So the high frequency part, which is the most expensive product in PGM, is the thing that's totally free. It's like air. It's everywhere. And this looks much, much harder. But then this is huge. I mean, pool pumps are just, there are a lot in Florida, but trivial in most of the world. But water pumping overall, all over the world is massive. Again, sanitation, agriculture, and it's everywhere. It's very, very flexible. So we've got this, and the question is how to harness it. How do you get the flexibility? How do you create that signal from loads and do it in a way that's not disruptive? And that term demand dispatch that Google coined and I'm trying to promote is this idea of being able to track a signal like that without impacting consumers. This is all marketing, okay? It's just I want a term that doesn't mention prices. There's no price here. The economics comes later. After we build the product, then we can talk about markets. Just, yeah. All right. So again, we did this. I'm not going to say it again, but we want high quality ancillary service to the grid. It should be reliable. Those are grid level issues, and cost effective is both for the grid operator. It's mainly for the grid operator, but this whole thing here about the consumers being absolutely untouched. I don't want them, unless they volunteer to suffer a bit. I don't want them to suffer. And so basically this idea of virtual energy storage, which is a manifestation of demand dispatch, is intended to achieve all these goals simultaneously. And I was screaming last lecture that you need a certain distributed control architecture, because if you want to maintain the QoS constraints in particular, something there has to be monitoring QoS, like the temperature in the building and things like that. But it's much more important than that. You need a particular control architecture for a lot of reasons, which I'll explain. All right, you with me? So this is what I want to go through. So basically, one load would have an architecture like this, which I'll explain. There'll be some signal zeta t, which was rho of t before, which is going to be broadcast to a collection of loads. So, maybe all residential water heaters will get one signal, and all residential pool pumps will get another signal, and all commercial chillers will get one signal. You'll break this out. I'll explain how you would do that at the end of the lecture, how you would decide how to allocate different resources and do this. And each load monitors its health and other quantities. So it's got the load has two measurements: a grid level measurement and its own state, which like a refrigerator would be temperature and whether it's on or off. Now again, the pre-filter I'll explain later. The decision rule here, do I turn on or off, is a major challenge. And as I said, flow to power light, I think, is thinking of centralized control. They'll have a list of all 800,000 water heaters, and they'll turn one off and then the other and then the other. And maybe that's, maybe it'll work for them. I don't know. It sounds like they don't need to do that anyway. And also, it's intrusive as hell. I mean, they'd have to collect all that information and send it to them. They would need to know the state of health of every fridge or every water heater, every home.
So it would be like through a combinatorial problem.
They would do it, yeah. The combinatorial mean, I mean, let me go back to the goals again. I mean, remember, like the low frequency things I've talked about sort of look like that. Maybe that's, 1 hour. But a refrigerator, say, and maybe that's 100 megawatts. And a fridge, you've got 1 kilowatt here, and it looks like this. Where that's 1 hour there, and that's 1 hour there. And, if you've got 1 million of these, you can stretch and shape and pull these and stack them up on top of each other so that their deviation from the nominal behavior follows this, and fridge. Because we're always talking about the deviation, So the average power is, say, 500 watts. So we're talking about deviation from 500 watts for the aggregate of pools. So you can imagine how hard it would be to do that. I mean, sure, you could write code to somehow fill this in with staircase functions and then somehow stack these all together. But I don't know. And you'd have to know all about the fridges. I mean, you'd have to know that you'd have to send all the information about every single fridge to the grid. That sounds awful. So forget that. I don't think that's the future. I don't see any reason for it. I just don't know why you would need that much two-way communication. So I forget it. I want maybe two-way, like one-way communication from the balancing authority to all loads of a particular class, and maybe occasional feedback once a day, just to get a status report. Are you on? Something like that. Maybe once an hour. Just occasional information back I can see is important. And the pre-fill I'll talk about as well. So the decision making, do I turn on or off? That's a hard problem, And I claim that randomized policies are absolutely required, which means I have to define randomized and I have to define policy. And so it's fun to type in, you have to type in randomized algorithm in Google to get enough hits. And you'll find 1,000 books, 1 billion papers, and all sorts of things. And this particular flowchart here is see RAN command there? Is to avoid synchronization in a communications grid. So everybody's backed off. They don't all jump back in together when congestion clears. They wait some randomized time before they get in. Now, this is a terrible analogy because randomized algorithms in communication are known to be inefficient. The capacity is maybe a third of what we can get from a more central, a non-randomized algorithm. The typical randomized algorithms that have been proposed. So it's just, the only point is to say they're used a lot when you need a very a simple solution to a complex, sort of combinatorial problem, like trying to fit in all these blocks in this curve. The randomized policy is not always bad. It's only in cases where, like when this was first done in Hawaii, it was for incredibly cheap hardware. They wanted really simple, cheap decision rules for multiple access communication, and so naturally, with so little information, so little computing, you had low capacity. But if with a little more information, a little more science, there's no problem at all. Randomized policies are awesome. But I have to define randomized and I have to define policy. So let's do it. You weren't there. You don't have to sign. Yeah, that was for the talk. Okay. So we covered all of that. Just kidding. Okay. So what do I mean? So basically, here's again the local control architecture. Again, this Y out here is going to be power from the load. So it's 1 kilowatt, 0. 1 kilowatt, 0. U is a set point, So let's mainly think it's an on or off, but it might be multiple. Like fans have multiple speeds, low, medium, high, or off. So there might be 4 values, but it's going to be discrete. I'm just thinking about what do we do in these combinatorial problems. And then X is a local state. Again, for a fridge, am I on or off, and what is my temperature? For a pool, am I on or off? How long have I been on? How long have I been off? And so, you can imagine for any kind of system, you can imagine what you think about as a state. What are important variables? And again, zeta t is from the grid operator and common to all loads of a certain class. A policy. So in industrial engineering, control, communications, it's a decision rule. It's something that maps some rule that takes this and maps it to decide, do I turn on or off, or what power set point should I be? Okay, it's called a feedback control law. If you can control, it's actually it's more operations research. They call it a policy, but this is what we're talking about. But a randomized policy again is just one that also uses the ran command in MATLAB. Not really, but it has a coin flip. And so it's an intelligent coin flip. And that's what's dangerous. When you say randomization, it sounds like you're saying arbitrary. You say, I'll do something crazy. And not at all. And you do this very, very careful design. All right? So it's a very, very, very intelligent coin flip. And you do this in a way to make an aggregate of loads follow that smoothly and beautifully. You want the aggregate of loads to look like a perfect battery. You can charge and discharge, and just do what you want with it. And so and that gives you degrees of freedom, is what it is. On off is not many degrees of freedom, but on with probability 0.2 or 0.3, 0.4. It's a whole range of choices, and so you need that. So now I need some notation. So this is just notation to define what I mean by randomized policy. And I swear this will be the only notation you'll have to see. So this is just typical notation. If you take my course next semester on stochastic processes, or if you've taken a course on where they cover Markov chains, you'll have seen this. Okay? So this notation is that the probability of the new state is x prime, given the old state is x, and zeta t is some value zeta. So I've got a function of 3 variables here that I have to design. And part of this is going to be the dynamics of the fridge or whatever. The fact that the temperature. I said that for a refrigerator, so for a refrigerator, it'll include U of t, which is am I on or off, and it'll include the temperature. So some of the randomness is from nature. People open and shut the door, or a defrost cycle comes on. And so that P, I can't design it all, but I can design the part here randomly. Do I turn on or off through some randomized control architecture? that's part of the reason why this design is difficult, is that some of the randomness is from nature, and some of it I'm actually building into the system. Right? And I can't do it. There's no way I could talk about design. I'll give you examples, but the design of this is way beyond the scope of this course. But at least I can give you some examples to give you some insight as to what a good design might look like. Okay? So there's two questions. I mean, how would you analyze an aggregate of loads? I've got a million air conditioners or refrigerators. How do I analyze how they behave together? And I'm going to try to explain that today. I don't know if I can get away with it. And how to design P zeta, I won't try. It's, I don't even know the best way. It's a totally research topic. We came up with some hacks that worked, and I don't know why they worked so well. But that design was the basis of those patents, the patent that I mentioned. So here's an example. This is from a talk I always like to give. Here's a whole bunch of pools, and I wanted to track exactly that signal. And you know what that signal is? It's the balancing authorities, the Bonneville Power Administration. So I often say authority. It's their balancing reserve signal, but put through a low-pass filter, because pools don't like chattering. Pools have a natural range of behavior, which is periodic with a 24-hour period. And asking them to perform like a reg D signal, which goes up 2 minutes, down 2 minutes, that's stupid. But a significant portion of the Bonneville Power Administration's balancing reserves are on very low time scales, corresponding to, look at that, 6 hours down, 3 hours up, 6 hours up, 3 hours down. Pools are saying, yay, we want to help. That's just like, they're made for that. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of pools in the Pacific Northwest. But again, they have gigantic refrigeration plants that you consume a lot of energy for cooling, for keeping fish clean, cool, that they can ship off to Japan, things like that, to Asia. All right. So again, this is hilarious. So I wrote this last night. I knew I'd be talking to the on-call people this morning, but you've all heard this now. On-call, we just saw, controls residential pool pumps, water heaters. We just saw that for businesses as well as residential. And again, contracts for services, they laugh at the idea of real-time prices. It's absurd. I can say that on camera. And today it's only used in times of emergency, but I've heard that they're interested in wider use of this program. So again, this is from a talk 2 years ago that they have their hands on the switch of nearly 1 million pools. So why don't they do something more with it? So they could, So this was a pitch I gave to them actually 2 years ago. All right, so here's an example. How would you design an intelligent pool? So after moving to Florida, I had a pool for the first time in my life. So now I know firsthand how they work. There's a pool pump, and it operates just like that. So instead of 1 hour, it's 1 day. And so the pool pump, say, runs for 8 hours, then it's off, for 16 hours. Then it's on for 8 hours and off for 16 hours. And but just for simplicity of this lecture, let's pretend it's 12. Mine is 12. Mine's on 12 and off 12. I have a symmetric operating cycle. And so here's this evolution of the state. So the state So exactly the same. It would be the power setting state, am I on or off? And then, and the cycle, time. How long have I been on or how long have I been off? Because that's the important indicator, right? Basically, if I'm off, I want to know how long I've been off, because when 12 hours is reached, I want to turn on. So that's the important indicator. Now, people don't care that much. If somebody changed my cleaning cycle to 11 hours today and then 13 hours tomorrow, I wouldn't care at all. And I don't think anybody with a brain would care at all. You know, I'm sure that somebody could convince the public that it causes brain damage to have your pool cycles change so, you know, like that. But it's not true, okay? So all I care about is get so much water flow through per week, say, or per month. Or, you know, there's certain constraints. Quality of service is very complex, you know. But I'm sure I could come up with a contract I could accept you know, based on hours. I want the number of hours per month exactly the same as my nominal behavior. No change at all. So you know, every month I want to make sure exactly no change in the total hours. Why? Because I want my energy bill to not change. You know, and maybe I want to limit the number of cycles as well. I mean, on-offs. I don't want them to be turning on and off my pool pump every minute. So you can't increase my number of on-off switches by more than 50%. That's the idea of a contract. You know, and then they can play with what's left. And so yeah, here it's just like a fridge. It's a kilowatt when running. I guess that's a big fridge, I guess. Again, U, as I said, is 1 or 0, whether it's on or off. And I just told you the local state. Time is I. That's what I called it here. How long I've been in my current power state. And this is a transition diagram in discrete time, where sampling time might be 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I don't know. But so this is per unit in the language of power engineering. So I'm on. The next 5 minutes later, I'm still on. 5 minutes later, I'm still on. And the nominal behavior is that after the equivalent of 12 hours, I go from on to off, and I go again. But so the nominal behavior is deterministic. I deterministically move along till I get to 12 hours, jump down, move along, 12 hours, and it's this periodic behavior. A fridge and a pool are the same. Okay. But we're going to throw in some randomization. So depending on where I am in the cycle, I can if I'm off here, I can switch on and go from whatever state I'm here to suddenly the one state, you know, because the one state means, I'm sampling. I sample. I've been on for, say, if it's every 5 minutes, I've been on for 5 minutes of the next sampling. And so designing that probability law takes some thought, because you want to do it so the customer's happy, they get what they want, and you want to do it so that the grid operator sees a battery. I want the grid operator to see a beautiful, controllable resource. All right. So the randomized policy again maps zeta t, xt, and the zeta t doesn't depend on I. Remember that. And this was implemented in MATLAB, so that's all we've got, the rand command in MATLAB, to this input UTI. All right. And here's the outcome of a particular design. All right. So this is a probability of going from off to on. All right. And zeta equals 0 is sort of the nominal behavior, and which should be deterministic. It should be probability 0 up to 12 hours, and then probability 1 afterwards, because that's how the nominal behavior of a fridge really works. We just took that and tilted it a bit. And so basically there's no chance, for zeta equals 0, no signal from the balancing authority, there's no probability, at least I get about 5 hours of cleaning before there's any chance I'll switch. And then there's a small probability that I'll go from off to on, and increases to about a half, and then eventually becomes 1 after, say, 16 hours. So I could design that. And so this is basically saying that 6 hours to 18 hours, whatever that period is my upper and lower limits of a particular time off. All right. And then as you make zeta bigger and bigger, the probability of turning on gets higher. So when zeta gets as high as 4, then after only a few hours being off, with very high probability to turn on. Okay? So these curves came out of a very, very complex, strange design procedure that is really pretty mathematically, but really hard to motivate. I won't even mention where it came from. But there's a lot of properties you can come up with from this. But is the curve clear? I mean, is it, you can see that zeta equals 4 is pretty nasty. It means that this pool after only a few hours, it's going to go from off to on. So you don't want zeta equals 4 very often. It's going to cause some short cycling of pools. And that's why I don't think this is, you can't have this alone. You know, a pool has to monitor its health, not just on a day-by-day basis, but on a monthly basis. You know, I don't want more than so many cycles per month. You know, and that's going to reduce the capacity of service. You know, the more you allow, you know, the more cycling you allow, the more capacity you'll get from the loads. You know. All right. Okay, but is that picture clear? So this is what the outcome of a design you get. Yeah. And, you know, this is what happens in practice. This doesn't look great. But remember I showed you a blue signal, which was a regulation signal from the Pacific Northwest, put through a low-pass filter so you wouldn't put the pools in stress. But these are just 20 pools, 20, 10, 20, with this randomized policy, okay? And you can track the balancing authority signal almost perfectly, but you see some chattering. Well, they're just 20 pools. I mean, come on, that's a kilowatt, isn't it? Yeah, that's a kilowatt. I mean, of course, it's discrete. You know, that's the whole Tetris thing. If I tried to ideally place these in here, I'd get a 1 kilowatt error, obviously. So what happens when you go to a higher number? If you go to 1,000, it's perfect. And unfortunately, I didn't have that. I can only go to 300,000. And I wish I did. I wish I had a plot of 1,000. But it's perfect. If you go to beyond 500 pools, you track a reg signal perfectly. Why is there some error? It's because of a feedback architecture. You end up with a little bit of high frequency bits being truncated off. You know, it's because you're, you know, there's some high frequency components that really were too high for the system. Big deal. You know, the rest that will be taken care of by another resource. And you know, you see that the input luckily does stay fairly small with this, even though 300,000 pools, 100 megawatts. Shit. Should we do the algebra? Okay, so we've got, it looks like that's 1 kilowatt. So it's, when all the pools are on, you have 3 times 10 to the 5th kilowatts of power. And let's switch to megawatts. So it's 300 megawatts. So it's 300 megawatt max. And it's 150 megawatt average for a 12-hour cycle. And that's what I'm assuming here. I'm assuming a 12-hour cycle. And so we can increase power consumption to the average. If all the pools were asynchronous, they, you know, all on basically completely, you know, they're all periodic but completely asynchronous cycles, then they'd be consuming almost exactly the average of 150 megawatts. You know, we could also make them track a perfect square wave at what magnitude? Yes, you get them to go up to 300 megawatts to 0. 300 megawatts 0. Well, that's really a square wave of amplitude 150 megawatts, because we're always looking at deviations. We're always looking at deviations from the average. So they could track a square wave of 150 megawatt peak perfectly. We're coming close, you know. We're getting up to 100 megawatts there, and we're not abusing them too much. What's that?
You go past 100.
You go past 100, yeah. So we're getting very close to, if you get up to 150, you've turned off, or turned on every pool. That's wild. I don't think we're going to do that in practice. So this is really pushing the system to its limits.
Wait, from every pool?
Yeah.
I think you mean
Between 0 to minus 100.
What's that? This deviation. Yeah, this deviation. That's why it's going negative. So this is the, you know, power consumption minus that average. Yeah. Yeah. So here, forget about signs, whether you turn them all on or off. Or,
Yeah, I was confused by the numbers.
Oh, yeah. So, so how do you, so that's anyway, so I didn't tell you how I designed this. It's a feasibility study. I'm going to have to say a few more things about this. So there's so many things to say. But anyway, this is just, you can get pools to do it without any thought at all. Just all independently flipping coins, and they perfectly track this. And the issues I mentioned in communication don't arise. There's not an efficiency loss or a capacity loss or something like that. Randomization is gold. It's amazing. You know? And that shattering is not because of randomization. It's quantization because there's only 20 loads. So it's amazing. And I mean, industry now, I mean, when I give this talk to industry people, they don't get scared anymore. You know, it's like when I first mentioned this to industry, they just thought that was crazy. But you show enough plots like this, they start to believe it. Okay, I'm going to have to slow down. I want to basically talk about how you would actually analyze this. You know, how would you even get your head around thinking about this system? Okay, and this is a universal concept. I'm not talking about just my research. What you end up doing is you look at, this is called the empirical distribution of these states. Okay? So remember, X is UT, am I on or off, and how long have I been on or off? That only takes on, say, 48 different values, maybe, or something like that, or 100 different values. The same thing with a refrigerator, we would quantize temperature in bins, so it would be a finite number of values. And all we're doing is we're counting up, for a particular time t, we're looking at all the number of loads that are a particular value x, where x, that capital X is all possible state values, all possible pairs here. Okay, and then the division by n is just a normalization. So this is a histogram of the data. Okay, now this is information that I don't want the utility to have to collect. This is just for analysis. You know. But this, it turns out, evolves. If you think of this as a row vector, so x takes on 100 values and call them 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 100. This order these guys, first state, second state, third state, and look at it as a row vector. Then the new state times t plus 1 is equal to the old state times t times this. The approximation is because if I really took that, if I took equality here, I'd have an error here. Okay. So there's a bit of error. So this looks like a linear state space equation and with a bit of noise. And the noise is small. It's like 1 over square root of n. So you've got a linear system. We've been talking about linear systems. We can do control. And then the output is there's going to be some function here of the state, which is going to be the average power consumption. And U here will just be 1 if U equals 1 and 0 else. And for a more complex unit, there might be different levels of power consumption, then you'd have that. But so you can actually get a model for the power output as well. Again, normalized by n in this case. But now it's actually, I lied to you. It's a nonlinear model. And why is that? Mu here you can think of as a state in a state space model. And y is a linear function of that state, right? Because that's just an inner product. So what's nonlinear about it? Let's make sure, some of you are falling asleep, that's why and some of you are checking your email. But what's nonlinear about this equation? So this state evolution equation, there's the output. Yeah, so it's right there, right? So the balance is, that's the thing we designed. Yeah. So remember, we designed. Yeah. So
okay. So it's a random.
It's a matrix of numbers, you know. It's just a matrix, you know. And so I didn't write down this whole gigantic matrix. I just gave you what part of it when I showed these plots. You know, this is just the probability of going from a particular state here back to that state. You know. And you'd get symmetry. You'd have similar probabilities from going from here to there. So this defines our transition matrix. And the thing is, unfortunately, it's not always going to be nonlinear in zeta t. So zeta t is a signal that the balancing authority is going to broadcast out to all of these loads, right? And so they want to really understand the dynamics of the system, and that's the trouble. It's nonlinear in the control signal zeta, and it always is going to have to be. You know, the fact that p takes on positive values, p is a matrix with positive values, means it's going to be always nonlinear in the control. But what's awesome is how almost linear it is. If you approximate this by a linear function of zeta, it's incredibly accurate in the examples we've looked at. Now, so linear zeta, I think, what do you think if I looked at a Bode plot, what would it look like? A linearization of this. If I had an approximate linear model, give me an idea of the magnitude plot. That's a hint. But pools like 24 hours. You know, if you ask the pools to track a square wave of period 24 hours, a symmetric square wave, they'd say sure, and nobody would mind at all. You know, they don't like so much a gigahertz. You know, and they don't like being off for a week and then on for a week. And in fact, that P was designed so that's impossible. You know, so is it obvious what a Bode plot would look like? What? No, a Bode plot. A Bode plot is when you put a sine wave. So if I put a sine wave into the system, I'll get a sine wave out. The magnitude of the Bode plot says how much that sine wave will be, the gain of that sine wave, how much it will be amplified or suppressed. And that's what a Bode plot is, right? And so it likes certain frequencies. This pools like certain frequencies and they despise others. Yeah. Well, so yeah, good. So you got part of it. So if I looked at a linear model of this, and F, I'm not going to use megas ever again. It's such a mistake. F is frequencies, and so omega looks like a grid. So you're saying it's going to be small at high frequencies, you said?
Smaller at high frequencies.
So that's like that, you know, because it's in dBs, it means it's going down. And very, very low frequencies as well, you might think it would go down. I mean, you bet by design it should. We'll actually find it doesn't, but that's okay. And what about, where will it be biggest? It's a preferred point. You know, it's going to do something like that and come down. I don't know about that. And that corresponds to 24 hours. And how do you do that computation again? You have to, well, put a star there. So there's some F star which corresponds to a 24-hour period. So that's what you always find out. When you do this, you find when you go through it, you get something like that. So this is pretty extreme, but mainly it's a scale. You get a resonance here at a frequency of 24 hours, and that range there is about 20 dB, so it's tenfold. And so it's got a very, very extreme resonance at that point. And you get this big phase drop. And here's two different designs, one for a 12-hour pool and one for a pool that's on 8 hours and off 16 hours. And they have resonances at the same point because their period is still 24 hours. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you had a pool that was on 6 hours, off 6 hours, on 6 hours, off 6 hours, then its resonance would be moved over. All right, is that clear? All right. So that's useful for control design, but that resonance is a bit annoying. You're not allowed to answer it, by the way, if you're doing research on this. If you're doing research on this, you're not allowed to answer the questions. What were you going to say?
like, I mean, for the low frequencies, I mean, like, if we see the low frequencies, like, it's a constant, but it's much, much below the resonance. So, I mean, like,
Yeah.
that is, like, I mean, so it's like the low frequencies are also, like, foods aren't comfortable with tracking the low frequencies as well.
Oh, no, but we know that. No, I mean, physically we know they're not.
Yeah.
But also, it's surprising that this.
It's not explained.
It's surprising this doesn't shoot down because the design was such. The design was such that it didn't allow. I mean, well. Oh, I take it back. I mean, look. If I take a square wave and I just shorten that by 10%. That I'm going to introduce a DC component. I'm going to reduce my average power consumption by 10%, or 5% maybe, you know, and that is a DC component. Yeah. So that's what that corresponds to. Is that the pools decide that instead of a 12-hour clean cycle on average, they have an 11.5-hour clean cycle per hour. So they use a little less power. So it's not so dumb, you know. It does fit. It fits the model. Actually, I take it back. I didn't really think about it carefully enough. So yeah, the fact that levels off is not so surprising. It would be removed from a contract, possibly, you know, that they would say, no, we want the exact amount, the same amount of power per month. Okay, so what would you do as a control engineer about this resonance? I mean, that resonance could be an issue. You know, I said this is a perfect battery, so that's not a perfect battery. A battery, you know, if I told it to put it, you know, if I send it a command to send it a sine wave, it would send out a sine wave. Here I put in a sine wave here, I get something. I put a sine wave here, I get something much bigger. It has a gain which depends on frequency. It's not a perfect battery, I lied. You know? So the dynamics, so that's always going to happen. So batteries are less exotic than loads. On the other hand, as I mentioned last time, batteries have behavior that looks like this as well. So I would apply these methods to batteries as well. And even for batteries, I would have this issue then. I would have something like a resonance. It might not be as steep, because batteries don't have this, you know, this periodic nominal behavior. But do you know what to do about a resonance? Feedback would be one way to do it, for sure. And that's how we initially did it. So in our first work in this area, and still, we assume that the grid operator has access to partial information about the power consumption, the aggregate power consumption of the pools, and they design a feedback law, you know, to get zeta t, you know, take into account that resonance. And you end up getting to use a PI controller. It works fine, you know. So that's one way to do it, and that's the first way we thought of doing it, and it's fine, you know. But if you wanted it to be like a perfect battery where you didn't have feedback, then you'd have to do more work. And the beautiful thing is that we can do whatever we want at these loads. And once we learn that our design has a resonance, we can do more, you know, shaping of the signals to suppress it. And given the fact that the resonance is so exactly identified, you know, we can go and play around with this. So that was the role. That's the reason I emphasized this pre-filter at the beginning. You can design a notch filter, which at least makes that, you know, makes this much less extreme. You know? And so that's that. Yeah, so I really believe something like this will be the way of the future. I can't imagine why not. It's so easy, you know. Just plop these on. You know, they've already got the pools all set up in Florida Palm Light. Why not drop them in? Okay, all right. We're supposed to have a break, aren't we?
We got like 20 minutes left.
Okay,
Let's
go. It's going. Okay, everybody. Yeah? Are you? Okay. Oh, you're not falling asleep. Okay. All right. Well, this won't take that long anyway, but it's interesting to think about how you would actually implement this in practice. And again, this is just, I want to talk about just an extension of what PGM does today. So remember, PGM has a regulation signal, and they break it into different frequency bands, just two today, based on the different resources available. So they've got some expensive resources, you know, and they give them the reg D, the high frequency reg signal, and the rest they give to cheaper resources. And why not do that with all these things? And so, remember this? So the entire, I mean not the entire, but my initial motivation for making you go through all the detail of modeling the grid was just to get to this slide now. That's not completely true, but I mean it's, no, not at all. But I mean it was, I definitely throughout was thinking of getting to this slide. No, you need to, if you're going to think about what's a good idea in terms of ancillary services and what's a bad idea, you need to understand the dynamics of the grid on this scale. And so this is from a lecture last year. I talked about a typical macro model of the grid. And I use this, for all of you, I use this paper by Baldic and all, only because I already had data for this particular example, so I can't admit that. But it's pretty generic. I mean, this is where this has its resonance and all of that. It's what you'd find from other regions of the U.S. But then, so we've gone on and talked about fear is justified here, and you all better know that. You know, this could be a midterm in 2 weeks, and I don't know how I'll do it, but someone going to ask you to explain why fear is justified. You know. And you hopefully saw that when you played around in Simulink. You saw some instability, I hope. And if you did, it's because you made your grid crossover frequency too large. you had higher gain out here where you shouldn't have. And so you don't want high gain in this region with great uncertainty, you know, and also where you know the phase is decaying. And this is a disturbance transfer function. The control transfer function goes down further. There's more phase lag. Okay, so we've already said this. So this is the reg D and reg A range. So this frequency range corresponds to periods, you know, I mean, of 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, I don't know, something like that. It's reg D and reg A, you know, from PJM. And as I mentioned before, like fans in commercial buildings, it's all done. You know, so basically, they can take the entire regulation requirements and take this part of that frequency range and send it to a combination of batteries and commercial buildings, and there are other loads that can provide that range. All right? And that's you can do the accounting. I'm sure there's enough for the entire planet. I think probably commercial buildings in Florida could take care of the whole U.S. Commercial buildings in the U.S. could take care of the whole world. I mean, it's just because the total magnitude of this in this bandwidth is not that great in this higher frequency range. It's not that enormous. So, okay, and so here is where I haven't done the whole accounting, but I know that this is like I said, a refrigerator had a nominal period of an hour, so it's going to be able to provide a bandwidth from 30 minutes to several hours of regulation. And so that's a residential water heater. They're residential, fridge, it's residential water heaters. There's commercial water heaters that will get the lower frequency ranges. I mean, and they're huge loads, a massive load in the US. So they're incredibly flexible, and they are batteries. They're thermal batteries. They're storing hot water or cold air or something like that. And so there's a company, I mentioned Ice Energy once. I sent an email about them. The Ice Energy is a little bit lower frequency. They're putting big ice cubes on buildings, as a way of storing energy, and they cool the ice when electricity is plentiful. And I thought they'd gone out of business, but they're back. And I'm sure it's because I was very excited when I first heard about them. So, but ice would be further over here. Ice Energy. So you've got these massive ice cubes with tubes running through them, and you freeze the ice when electricity is plentiful, and you don't freeze it when it's not. That's a low frequency ancillary service on the order of hours. And so water pumping and pool pumps and chiller tanks and Ice Energy's air conditioning systems, I go out here the pools, but that's 10,000 pools. That's an old plot. That's all done. It seems like it's done. And the most amazing thing is California. I mean, for low frequency regulation, they have 20% of their power consumption is just pumping water. It's stealing water from Mexico, and they pump water from the Colorado River and I always joke to water the lawns in Beverly Hills, for agriculture. Yeah.
California doesn't have any water right now.
Yeah, but they people are still drinking water, and it's not a joke that all the water they can from the Colorado River, they take over the Sierras, and it goes into Southern California mainly for agriculture to water the crops, and those almond trees are a big part of the economy in California, and they get watered still. And the vineyards, my God, it's sad. I was in Sonoma. It's so sad. I mean, how dry it is. So they still, this is not old. This is, I don't know. But yeah, you're right. There's no water in California. There's no economy anyway.
2012?
Oh, 2012, yeah. Well, you can still, but still, it hasn't changed. But also just sanitation in big cities, they have to pump all that stuff. It takes a lot of energy. It's amazing. And I don't know the accounting in other parts of the world, but California, which is going to need so much regulation services, they've got so much flexibility. So the capacity there is fantastic. So just let's stop. So the big thing is, again, can buildings and swimming pools replace batteries? I mean, I'm not advocating that. I think they're an adjunct that's going to work alongside them. But the volatility of renewable energy is manageable, and people who claim that it's expensive, just give them a quote I gave about Henry Ford could never have sold cars without the bicycling lobby. If bicyclists had not lobbied for roads, Henry Ford never would have gone into business selling cars. So we're currently missing infrastructure. The world is, except for Florida Power and Light, Florida Power and Light has put in the infrastructure, so they're like Henry Ford. They can go tomorrow because they've got the infrastructure set up. And I really think these decentralized control architecture is the way to go. I can't imagine doing everything, collecting all the data about quality of service state, that XT, for every load in all of Florida, and then doing this combinatorial nightmare of who do I turn on and off. You're taking on the responsibility as well. I mean, you're just taking a huge risk as a company. I think putting as much intelligence in the load as possible simplifies the control job at the FP&L or elsewhere. And the capacity is enormous, and I wish I could tell you more about how much. I only know for the higher frequency range. I can give you numbers. For the rest of it, I just have Neil promises to do the work to do that. But the open questions, I don't know. Oh, this is bad. I revised these notes late last night, and this is from a technical talk. Passivity means, does it look like a wire? Does it, want a mathematical definition? I forget it. It's a control concept. And a passive system is really easy to control. High gain feedback's always stabilizing. You can do anything. And it's close to just having a Bode plot that's really flat. But I think we can just do that through design. Partly through design of the randomized control architecture and additional pre-filtering. But if the randomized control architecture isn't good, then you can't design a pre-filter. So these things have to be done together. This whole thing about synthetic inertia and governor response from loads. That was a dream of Fred Schweppe from MIT. He patented something for doing that. So every dishwasher would provide droop. It would ramp up and down power consumption on the order of 10 seconds, like governors do today, and provide synthetic droop for the grid. It never worked because no, it's too big.
Good for dishwashers.
Yeah, all the loads providing that. I mean, they've did studies and. Remember how conservative NERC is about droop gains. There's 5%. Remember the NERC article? It said 5% no greater than 6%. If you've got a whole bunch of loads going and flowing around, you have no idea what their gains are. It could be sometimes the effective droop gain is 50% and sometimes it's 0. So it's just that's the range. That's where the scary part is. I said fear is justified in this frequency band. And so my gut feeling is if you do this, you'll do very conservative. Really, you'll help out just a tiny bit and let the governors do their job. But what about a homework problem? So that's what I did. So that homework problem I showed you at the beginning of the lecture, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to do droop at low frequency. Why isn't that done today? I don't know. You know.
Or you just
Yeah.
say it's uncertain.
Well, but we don't care about low frequencies. Uncertainty in low frequencies, you know, I mean, it just doesn't matter. This pool transfer function, I don't know its shape very well. Remember, PI compensation, all I'm doing is cranking up the gain. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, think about how crude PI control is. Just, you know, it's just incredible. You don't need a lot of model certainty in low frequencies. It's only at that certain band where you really need to know the plant well. So I came up with this homework assignment. I started thinking about it after last lecture, and you know, but it won't be too hard. It'll be fun to play around with. And again, we don't know why the grid works today. I've referenced this paper by Thorpe, so I can sometimes come off like I know the answer. Please don't. Nobody knows the answer. Nobody knows what the future is going to look like, you know. So never ever trust anybody, including me. But these are just some design principles that I hope will work. And again, this is something I stick in every talk because everybody wants me to talk about real-time prices, and this is just my FU to that. You know, that we can get consumer engagement. Florida's doing it today in their on-call program, and they can do it tomorrow. And I know you can get people excited about this, right? I mean, if you explain to the public what this is for, and that you can get all this solar energy if you just get this stuff in place. I mean, don't you agree you could get the public excited? I mean, no? Is it just me? I mean, people are busting for solar, and they claim they want to save the planet. Most people just want to save money. But if you explain the issues, that yes, you could have a lot of solar, but we'd have to do this balancing act. Just like you could have cars if only we had roads. I don't know. It seems we could sell this. I don't know, but you know. Anyway, enough of that. So that's it. That's the end of this part of the course. You know, basically, there's a bunch of stuff that I left out thinking I didn't have time, and I'm going to stick it in starting next lecture. And it'll sort of be optional, but I hate to say that. I'm afraid nobody will come. But it's a base about reactive power, AC and DC power flow, stuff that is very independent, you know. But I feel like, you know, I'm going to cover it even if nobody comes. I'll cover it. Or if you'd like, I could just. I've got it videotaped from last year, and I could just. But maybe not. It'll be fun to come in. Yeah, but I think that's all I have to say about this, about, you know, controlling the grid. Yeah, until next time. Oh, but next time there's not Tuesday, so I'll send out an announcement. I have to be in Washington, D.C. next Tuesday, so next lecture is next Thursday. Yeah, okay. Information to be announced.